I have the pleasure of introducing a good friend of mine that last year I actually met Marcus. I was looking for a guest speaker for my personal events, and I ran across Marcus's story. It was like so it was just so inspirational. Marcus turned pretty much his trials and tribulation into triumph, where from serving an 8-year prison sentence, he actually came home and developed his own app called Flikshop, where they pretty much they send messages and photos to prisoners, and they have served over 140,000 prisoners so far. And also, Marcus was named one of John Legend's Unlock Future Business Accelerators, and he's also a board member of the Justice Policy Institute, where pretty much they work on prison reform. It's always been a pleasure. Mark is one of the people that actually inspired me to do so many great things that I've personally accomplished. So, without further about me explaining too much about him, I just want to give him the floor because he does a better job than me. So, Marcus, take it from here, bro.
Oh, dope. Thank you so much, Musa. Thank you guys so much for inviting me. All of you amazing Rotarians. Like, I'm so excited to be able to be here. So if you see me like going like, on cloud 10 and I'm like smiling and cheesing through the whole entire presentation, is because for years I grew up, driving past the Rotary Club. And I always wanted to know what happened inside of the Rotary Club. And then along the journey, I would meet people like Musa, who were a part of the Rotary Club, and I will learn about the amazing impact that you guys are having around the world. And to know that I'm sitting amongst such greatness on this call, I'm really super excited to be able to be here. Musa did an incredible job in not only inviting me, but introducing me. So thank you so much, Musa. I'm so grateful for you for bringing me here this afternoon. I think to be able to get the meat and potatoes of a conversation, which I would prefer to have. I'm more of the dialogue type versus the monologue, talk at you kind of sort of person. I want to be able to reserve room for you all that want to ask questions. So what I'll do is I'm going to share a little bit about my journey and the problems that we want to be able to solve over at Flikshop. But this is also the time where I'm offering up you to share your divided attention with me, because you're either tweeting to me, tweeting at me, or posting about on Instagram or on Facebook about something that resonated with you. If you're wondering where to find me on any of the actual social channels, obviously I'll share my email address at the end of the talk, this call, but I always like to be able to make sure that you all have an opportunity to be able to connect with me a little bit deeper after each one of the talk. So what I'll do is I'm going to throw my handle inside of the chat so that you guys can have that already ready to go in the event that something resonates with you. All right, so I'm going to jump in and let's start this conversation. I think to be able to give context to what it is that we what it is that we built, let's talk about what it is that Flikshop does. We built the technology that keeps families connected to their incarcerated loved ones. Our users have the ability to take a picture, add some quick text, press send, and for 99 cents, we print that picture and text on a real tangible postcard, and we ship it to any person in any prison, anywhere in the country. Now, the reason why we built this technology is because I wanted to figure out a way to effectively reduce recidivism. For all of you buffs that enjoy using that kind of sort of word in a sentence, that fun word recidivism impacts so many lives inside of our country. 600,000 people come home from prison every year, and the majority of them, in fact, 76% of them, return right back within the first 3 years. This was a massive problem for me as I continue to see this happen, and I became very passionate about what it is that we want to build. In order to be able to even go dig deeper to give context of why I'm so passionate about it, what I'll do is I'll share a little bit about my journey. When I was 15 years old, my best friend and I, we made a decision to carjack a man in a shopping mall parking lot. We were in Fairfax, Virginia. We tapped on a man's vehicle window with a firearm at 15 and 16-year-old kids and sophomore and junior in high school, and demanded the man to get out of the car. That horrible decision landed that man opening up his car door, getting out of his car. We jumped inside of his car and pulled off, leaving him in that parking lot, living dazed and confused, wondering what just happened to him. While we were speeding down 95, I had no idea what the legal ramifications of the decision that I made during my sophomore year of high school, because honestly, all I wanted to do was go back and play inside of the state championships what we were preparing for while I went to Stoughton High School and were playing against Sherwood. It was interesting that my 15-year-old brain didn't understand what was happening. And the reality of it is that even after the very next day, after committing that carjacking and eventually landing myself in handcuffs just a few hours into the morning, as a result of it, I still hadn't understood what was happening. In fact, my 15-year-old brain was I was trying to rationalize what was happening with myself in my head, while also trying to articulate to the police officers that were arresting me that I didn't want them to tell my mom, because I was much more fearful of a police officer than I was my own mother and getting on punishment by my mom. Eventually, that decision landed me inside of that jail cell that would now certify me as an adult while I was 15 years old, and I would eventually get sentenced in prison to 8 years in adult maximum security prisons. I spent my 16th birthday, after growing up, spending all of the rest of the 15 years in there, the 17th birthday, 18th birthday, the 19th birthday, my 20th birthday, my 21st birthday, 22nd birthday, 23rd birthday, all growing up inside of some of the state of Virginia's worst prisons. In fact, it wasn't even until year number 2 where I jumped outside of my own delirium, because in year 1, when the judge first sentenced me, and I was actually quoted in the courtroom by saying, "Your Honor, we'll deal with this whole car theft thing later on, and I know you just wanted to sentence me to some time, but I'm going to be playing in the state championship against Sherwood in a couple of weeks. So I'll go play in the state championship. I'll come back and we can revisit this thing, and we'll go to court and wrestle with it later." And the judge looked at me while I was in the courtroom and said to me, "Young man, you have no idea of the magnitude of the decision that you made. And I'm going to allow your lawyer to explain it to you while you try to figure out how you're going to serve these 8 years in these adult maximum security prisons." Even then, I went back to my cell just wondering, like, oh my gosh, like, I hear him, but clearly there's no judge that will let me stay in here through Christmas. Clearly there's no judge that will let me stay in here through the last day of school, and then the first day of school, and then Valentine's Day, and then my birthday, and on and on and on until year number 2, when I'm about 17 years old. I'm 2 years into my prison sentence, and I asked my best friend, Danny B., who was in his mid-50s, because, prison is one of the only places you can be in your mid-50s and, like, have a best friend that's, 17? And I'm asking him, I'm like, "Danny B., how long have you been here in prison?" And Danny B., he looks at me, he tells me, "Marcus, I've been here for 31 years. Immediately, as I'm walking around that prison rec yard track, my palms get sweaty, my heart drops down to my toes, and it literally hit me like a ton of bricks that now I'm actually going to have to serve all 8 of my years if they will make Danny B serve 31 years in prison." Now my 15-year-old Marcus, 16-year-old Marcus that was going through the housing unit wanting to play tag around a bunch of grown men who didn't have any space or time to talk about what was happening inside of my earth science class, now pivoted to a new Marcus instantly in that moment where I realized my life was possibly over. In fact, my cell partner had life plus 43, and every day he would talk about the possibilities of him just dying looking at cinder block walls. I never saw anything really different between my cell partner and I, because we both lived in the same cell, we ate the same food, we were suffered under the same conditions, and ironically, we were around from the same neighborhood. Because we were from the DC area and I was locked up in Virginia, and at the time, Virginia had a big beef. Richmond, Virginia had a really big beef with Washington, DC. The very first thing that someone told me when I got on the rec yard was, "Marcus, look, I know you're the youngest person in this prison rec yard, but you're from DC. And the one thing you need to realize is that you can't walk out on that rec yard just walking out there, just walking out there with a shirt on. You need to walk with this jacket, put this coat on, make sure you cut the inside slit of the coat and stuff magazines all around the coat. So just in case someone tries to cut you and knife you in the middle of the rec yard, you'll have protection. And even though it's August and you can see the heat waves going through the wind, you still need to wear this big, heavy coat every single day before you leave out of your cell." This was a new life I was facing, and I immediately became angry. I became depressed, and I was very dark. I got tired of seeing people getting wheeled down the rec yard in body bags because of this big beef. And I got tired of hearing all of the correctional officers tell me how stupid I was and how horrible of a person I was because now I ended up with the big boys, and it didn't matter how old I was. I was this little small, scrawny kid that weighed 165 pounds soaking wet. And even though I was tall and lanky, they knew that I was always going to be known as the youngest person in the prison rec yard. And because the way that my judge sentenced me to have to serve all of my time in maximum security prisons, my mom got concerned about this because she saw this new dark Marcus that was starting to bloom. I was the guy who hated everybody now. I went from happy-go-lucky, oh, somebody will figure this out, to now, oh my gosh, I hate my lawyer, I hate my judge, I hate the prosecutor, I hate my cell partner, I hate myself, I hate my mom, I hate the warden, I hate the correctional officers. I'm angry, and everybody can get it. When my mom began to sense this frustration in me, and she's talking to me on the phone, I'm telling her, Mom, listen, look, I'm your only son, and you need to start grieving now. You need to let me go now, because the reality of it is that I'm probably not going to make it out of this situation. That's the likelihood of this role, the reality, Mom. And every time that you have to press 0 to accept this $18, 15-minute collect call is running up your phone bill with the possibility of you eventually having to pay $500 for my body, because that's what happens when you get killed in prison, Mom. And my mom, she's listening to me on this phone, and she's like, you know what? I hear you. I hear you. You don't want me to come visit you anymore. You don't want me to write you anymore. I hear you. Guess what I'm going to do? I'll be down there this weekend. Here comes my mother walking into a prison visiting room like I'm in summer camp, telling me how much she loves me and how much there's a life ahead of me on the other side of this prison sentence, attached to a promise that she was going to actually write me a letter or send me a picture every day for the remaining 6 years of my prison sentence, in hopes that that will shine a light on some of those aspirations that were fleeting out of my mind with every waking day of a cold, clanking prison door shutting behind me. I'm sitting in a prison visiting room. I'm like, Mom, so you think that these Polaroid pictures that you're about to send me is going to change anything? Because when you go in your car and you see you rolled around the window and had a breeze falling through through the trees and all this, I'm going to have to go back on this other side of this prison rec yard. And when those doors clank, I'm going to have to squat and cough before I even go anywhere. I'm going to have to worry about whether or not what's going to happen when I have to go. I'm going to have to worry about commissary. I'm going to have to worry. Like, Mom, my life is different. Your life is completely different than mine. So my mom is looking at me across from this visiting room table that's filled with quarters and honey buns, because I loved honey buns, and she always made sure I had honey buns when I walked into the visiting room. She hugged me and said, Marcus, I hear you, but I love you. And I don't care what mistakes you make. I'm going to be here for you and help show you that there is still light at the end of your tunnel. My mom walked out of that prison visiting room. I walked back to the rec yard, and I'm like, yeah, all right, Mom, whatever. My mom keeps up on a promise. My mom writes me a letter, or she sends me a picture every day for the next 6 years from that day forward. My mom sends me pictures of the most random things. She would send me pictures of a cheeseburger or a picture of a mattress in a department store, along with a 4-page letter telling me how much I'm going to enjoy a fat, juicy burger when I come home, or that one day I'm going to sleep on an actual pillow top mattress. One day I'm going to be able to walk through the amusement park and I'm going to enjoy a big, big plate of funnel cake. And she would send me this cake. She would send me pictures of my nieces standing in front of the Shockwave roller coaster at King's Dominion, eating their funnel cake, looking scared to death, while I'm permeating those pictures around the rec yard, because I'm like, yo, this is crazy. My mom is like the Instagram before Instagram. She's sending me pictures of everything while I'm sitting in these cells, and there's no fresh content coming into prison because there's no internet. There's no Facebook or Instagram or easy emailing or texting or any of these vehicles. So for the people that have been in these prisons for years and sometimes even decades at a time, all of them are sitting at their doors every day waiting for mail call, waiting for Marcus's name to get called in hopes they'll see the new pictures. In fact, I remember the first time my mom realized that I was sharing photos with my friends, because she often tells this story of the first time she came into the visiting room, maybe a year or two later, and someone walks in the visiting room like, oh, hey, Ms. Bullock, how you doing? And they're like, okay, hey, how you? She's like, well, did you get your washer and dryer? Did you get your washer and dryer fixed? My mother's looking at them like, how do you know about my washer and dryer? I'm like, Mom, you sent me a picture, your washing machine. Then there was an argument on a housing unit. One dude used to work for Kenmore. Another guy talking about Maytag is the best. It was an argument. Just go with it, Mom. And she's sitting like, okay, okay. All right, well, thank you. I'm working on getting my drive fixed. And it was interesting because now the kindred spirit that I shared with my brothers that now I was growing up in these prison cells with, they also had something to look forward to. Fast forward to 2004, when I was released from prison, you know who was there to come pick me up that cold morning on February the 3rd, when I had no idea that this was actually going to end. My mom comes in, she picks me up. She picks me up, and it's crazy because the entire world changed. I mean, I spent all of my teenage years and all of my early 20s growing up in prison. When I got locked up, I had a pager on my hip. Now there's the internet. I mean, the first time I get home and I go on google.com and I type a word tiger and all these pictures of tigers pop, my mind is exploding. I couldn't believe how much the world has shifted since I had been gone. And I just knew that I was going to be on a path to be able to recreate a new Marcus later on. I went out, going to go trying to get job after job after job after job. I'm applying for jobs. I want to be able to build my life. I can't believe I'm 23 years old. And I really can't even really explain where I've been for almost the last decade of my life. But I'm applying for these opportunities. I only have a sixth grade. My last grade completed was the ninth grade. The last graduation I had was in the sixth grade. So now I'm like, how do I even articulate my value add to the world? But I'm applying and I'm applying. And interestingly enough, what I learned is that most of these job applications all precluded me simply because they had that one question on the application. Have you ever been convicted of a felony? I had to check that box over and over again. In fact, I had to check it 41 times, and it wasn't until the 42nd job application they asked me the same exact question. Have you been convicted of a felony, with comma, within the last 7 years? Now, I had just served an 8-year prison sentence, so I was able to easily honestly like, no, I absolutely have not been convicted of a felony within the last 7 years. And that was my first opportunity given my first job. It was at a paint store where I was commissioned to mix paint for customers. And even though I was only making minimum wage, I absolutely loved going to work every day. I felt so blessed and grateful to have an opportunity to be able to not only get out of my mom's house and help contribute to our household, but let me tell you something, I haven't talked to a woman in almost a decade. So people come to the paint store, I'm like, hey, how you doing? I want to know what you have for breakfast. I want to know what you have for dinner. I want to know everything there is about you because I'm so fascinated by this new life that I'm living. And everyone saw my exuberance every day when I came to work. In fact, the customers will come into the paint store and they would ask me, Marcus, how much do you charge to paint kitchens? And I'm like, well, Ms. Johnson, we don't paint kitchens. I'm gonna sell you this blue paint so you can paint your own kitchen. But painters will come into the paint store and they will talk about this new recession that was starting to pin and the housing crisis and all of this stuff. So I'm like, what are you talking about? You aren't gonna have any work. Construction is changing. Ms. Johnson comes, oh, a light bulb goes off. And I realized that I could be the conduit between the painters who are fearful about losing their jobs in a recession and the Ms. Johnsons of the world who needed to have work happen inside of their homes. I created a small painting business that would go out and paint these kitchens and living rooms. And over a year and a half, we ended up growing this small painting business into a painting business that was able to bid on a project at BWI Airport. That was my first major bid, and I couldn't believe it when I got the award letter that said, Marcus, you have won this contract with a 3-year, it was a 3-year contract with a 2-year option, and it changed my entire life. Now I was able to quit working that job at the paint store. I was able to grow this amazing construction business over time. We ended up getting more contracts with folks like Georgetown University and National Press Club and then Howard University. And now I'm growing a small painting business into this major construction company that now is employing 18 employees. And I didn't even realize that the first 16 people of the 18 that I hired all had felony convictions just like me. It was incredible sitting inside of the office and people will come into my desk and they would be applying in these interviews. And I'm like, oh, well, tell me a little bit about yourself. They're like, Marcus, I want to be honest with you before we get to it. I have a felony conviction and I know it's one. I'm like, wait a minute, you got a felony? Bro, I got 3 felonies. Let's talk about it. I mean, yeah. And it was interesting because these men and women now knew that they have a safe space to be able to go find sustainable, gainful employment where they got paid great wages, but had the pride of work and they were able to build and blossom their careers off of that. We ran that construction company for another 6 more years that allowed me to be able to travel the world and move my sister out of a horrible neighborhood. My mom was able to retire from the federal government, and I was able to buy her a nice luxury car for a retirement gift. I mean, my life was incredible. I was living literally on a cloud. I'm literally living my best life. But my friends, the ones who I grew up in those prison cells with, they were actually sitting in their cells and would write me and say, Marcus, how come you haven't sent me any pictures? I mean, you literally are living your best life out there, but you act like you don't remember when your mom used to send you pictures of every moment. Like, dude, send me pictures. I felt horrible because I knew how important and valuable that human connection was and how important the mail call was. And after searching on my computer, knowing that there's apps that help me get my coffee quicker, there had to have been a solution to help me connect with one of my friends. I mean, there were millions of people that were incarcerated. Clearly, there had to be a tool that allowed us to do that. When we looked into the Apple in the Apple App Store, we didn't see any. I Googled now how to build a mobile app. Now, the short story is we eventually landed on what became Flikshop, and we launched that app in 2012. And since then, we connected now. Musa, the number has bumped it. We've connected over 170,000 families around the country with our technology. We sent over 680,000 postcards into jails, prisons, juvenile detention centers, and now even ICE detention centers all across the country. And I'm super excited to know what that means for our families. I'm excited to know that our families have the opportunity to not only connect with their loved ones, but even now our employers who we partner with, like Boeing, Slack, Facebook, Apple, Delta Airlines, Bank of America, they all leverage our technology, our data, our artificial intelligence now to be able to build their hiring pipelines, to be able to build their medical insurance pipelines to ensure that every person coming home from jail or prison has access to adequate health care when they come home. Governments are leveraging our technology to ensure that every person has a social security card or driver's license at the moment of their release to help make sure that they don't suffer from the collateral consequences that come along with incarceration after they go through a reentry program. All of these amazing abilities only came as a result of my dark cloud, but now building a silver lining that continues to connect families and businesses across the globe allows me to now create a soapbox for me to go on, step on, and try to begin to erase stigma. You see, there's tons of brilliance that are sitting around in these jails and prisons all around the country. And my job is to be able to help shift the narrative of what can happen with the right support, social capital, and real resources. Now, my mom was my social capital and my resources. I'm grateful for what she's given to me. But this opportunity gives me the opportunity to be able to create a cloud that can loom over some of the other 600,000 people that are coming home out of these hills. And if the cloud does its job, it can rain down with social capital and resources to be able to create a legion of Marcuses all around the country. I'm super grateful for the blessing that my mom was for me, the soapbox that I have now today, and the opportunity I have, whether it's giving one of my several TED Talks, speaking around the country, in fact, going to the White House and working with the President of the United States on legislation that impacts some of the policies that are centered around people that are formerly incarcerated, or even working with some of the largest corporations around the globe to be able to impact their diversity, equity, and inclusion practices, their corporate social responsibility, or their ESG departments. I'll stop right there because I think it's important to be able to allow for you guys to engage and interact with me. But I wanted to be able to, one, give the opportunity to be able to make way for the next Marcus that hopefully will end up to here today on one of these future calls with all the Rotarians. Thank you guys so much for inviting me to this afternoon's conversation.
Marcus, thank you so much. Wow, what a story, and amazing where you've taken it and how you've given back, which is what Rotary loves to do. So we're really pleased that you've agreed to talk to us today. We're now in Q&A, and we usually have lots of Qs. So and it sounds like you'll have good answers. So I'd like to sort of, as the moderator for the moment, to start by asking you this question.
Sure, absolutely.
How do we help the 15-year-olds like you stay out of that? What needs to happen so that that 15-year-old brain understands better the consequences of those actions, so that we don't even have to go down that road?
You know, it's interesting. You know, Steve, thank you again for welcoming me, and I'm grateful to have this conversation. I think that's a really good question. You know, sometimes I ask myself, you know, what would have prevented the 15-year-old Marcus from traveling down that path and making some of those decisions that would have landed me where it landed me? Now, one, I mean, it's hard, Steve, because I'm right now, today, in this moment, and some of you may share the same, but I'm speaking from a place of privilege. Where I live right now is not littered or peppered with the same kind of people and circumstances where there was where I was living. When I walked out of my front door, I saw Big Mike standing outside in front of his Mercedes Benz, smoking weed and blasting music, and all the girls loved him. You know who I wanted to be like? Big Mike. I definitely want to be like my mom, who was driving to work every day in a Ford Escort and going to go work for the federal government in what it seemed to be a dead-end job that wouldn't get me probably girls like Big Mike had. Because that's all you cared about as a teenager was girls and sneakers, at least where I came from. And so there's an interesting conversation that has to be had around the social component and the social even economics around what 15-year-olds like me had to grow up and see in their neighborhoods. But one of the things that I see most times now in our communities today are people that or corporations or even partners that work with us that want to help support the folks who are already making the bad decisions or going down the road in hopes that they can go try to reel them back in. And I wonder how many people would have, or how many of these corporate partners were willing to be able to shift the way that they're thinking about going to try to save the people that are making some of the wrong decisions. But what about the folks that are standing on the island on their own, trying to get out of that horrible scenario, trying to climb over the gate because they see the promised land on the other side of it, but don't have access, the social capital or the resources? Someone like me. Someone who was winning oratorical contest after oratorical contest, or was a starting shooting guard on my basketball team, or was a part of the Benjamin Banneker Math Club. Like, I didn't have opportunities to be able to have mentors or resources because all of the mentors and resources were focused on the people that were making the bad decisions. So the only opportunity I had was either get into the club with people that were making bad decisions so I could finally gain access, or try to pull myself up by my own boots, knowing I don't even have laces to lace them up myself. Right? So sometimes it means getting and find the folks that are willing, that already are on the cusp, right? And then giving them the laces that they need, i.e. social capital and resources, to allow them to be able to hop over the fence and go and trudge forward.
Thanks very much. I think that's really insightful and a lot to think about right there. So we have a lot of questions. Let me turn to Dr. Sam first. Dr. Sam, you're up.
Thank you very much, Marcus. Thank you for being here. At one time, I was providing training and education in 13 different prisons in Virginia, the federal pen in Petersburg, and 27 jails. So I understand where you're coming from, because every day I was meeting with people just like you that wanted to get out, and we were trying to help them do that. So thank you. That's my soapbox.
Thank you.
Thank
you.
But I want to go to the technical part. Rotary International is growing very rapidly in Asia, Latin America, different places around the globe that have high youth. 60% on the African continent, as an example, are under 30. So how do we migrate to the phone apps, just like what you're using, in order to promote Rotary and reach out? So this is a technical question and not about your background, but how do we leverage what you've been able to discover and create for our Rotary Club, but also Rotary International? And I want to be able to make sure you're on to really something huge here for Rotary.
No, thank you for that. I'm grateful. Thank you for your comments. Thank you for your work as well. I'm always grateful to learn about people that are going back into these sales and care about the folks that live there. So what I think that your question is like, how can Rotary leverage technologies like ours or others that will allow for them to be able to communicate back and forth to this population of people?
Correct. Or create our own app, a Rotary app that people can get to through Google and Apple stores, and just download it and away they go.
Yeah, I mean, so I'm more than happy to have a one-off conversation with you about like what the process looks like to be able to go from ideation to wireframing the idea to what the technical requirements would be for that kind of application, as well as what the backend technologies need to be in order to be able to support it. And then there's a layer around deployment, and then there's like there's app maintenance. So all of those, each one of those steps, I'm more than happy to walk you through and then talk through what the what the requirements would be in order to be able to build something like that out. I'll throw my email address inside of the chat, and then definitely just drop me a note and we can get something on the calendar for Zoom.
Okay, and also your number. I'll probably send you a text message if you don't mind.
Yeah, absolutely, will do.
Okay, thank you for being here.
That would be great.
Thank you, Marcus. So let's turn now to Armenia. Armenia.
Yes, hi Marcus. It's very, very interesting your story. You are very well articulated. You have a lot of gift. And because you are doing this kind of reach out to people that are inmate, I wanted to ask you a question because you talk a lot, especially at the beginning, about how angry you were with the system for which you were in jail. How can you help people also to feel responsible for what they did, for which they enter in this kind of tunnels? Because this is a fundamental important to get out from the tunnel, the sense of responsibility.
Yeah, I think that, you know, so I don't think that the majority of people who end up in these situations, I spent 8 years in prison, right? And there wasn't a person in there that didn't, that I met. Like TV will tell you, media will tell you otherwise, right? It'll tell you that folks don't take accountability, folks don't believe that, you know, everyone's innocent in prison. That's not the truth. That's the farthest thing from the truth. Most people in prison, they say they're like, yo, I was guilty. I did a horrible thing. I did a bad thing. And now I want to try to figure out how to be able to try to help mitigate others that come from behind. That's what the majority of people will tell you. Now, the media will tell some of you something otherwise, but I think that the interesting question would be how to help prevent folks from getting up in those spaces in the first place, which kind of sort of was the first answer. But the second one of like getting to a place of accountability. I mean, I'm sure there are people out there that say, you know, that feel bad or don't take, that don't feel bad or maybe don't take responsibility. But I think that then becomes literally a mental health issue. I think it's less about, you know what I mean, like the issues around the crimes that were committed and they did. And then the other thing is like the vast majority of people that are sitting inside the cells, especially when I think about recidivism reduction, the 76% of people that I talked about before that go back to prison, the majority of them are going back to prison on a technical violation. So they're going back on the technical, you know, they have probation and parole, and then they are supposed to leave the house after 10 p.m. And they had to go run to the Food Lion to go get some medicine for the kid, and they didn't make it back to the house. The reality is they got home at 10:30, PO call, and they're like, oh yeah, you violated, you going back 3 more months, 6 months, 3 years, 5 years, whatever, because of that. And so like then it's challenging for them to be able to accept accountability, because now they're like, yo, I did my time on the first one, but now you send me back as a result of me going to go get medicine for my children. And then what it causes now is this apprehension to talk about the wave of patterns, the collateral consequences of probation and parole. This is the impact of the probation and parole. And so one of the things I want to do is I want to help shift the narrative around that as well. And I mean, I don't know if I answered your question or not, but I'm hoping that I did. Please tell me if I did not.
Yes, you did, but I was a little more specific because it's very important to feel responsible because you can prevent further problem.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think, you know, feeling responsibility and accountability, I think that those things, you know, obviously help mitigate, you know, future bad decision making. But you know, the people that are in prison though, I mean, we're talking like, I think that there's a problem. The people who haven't made it there quite yet, they don't have the handcuffs on them quite yet, right? They're potentially positioned to go commit a crime this afternoon, the crime that didn't happen quite yet, right? That's a issue. Like I try to work at the Flikshop School of Business to help shift what they feel as though the options are that will force them to go do the things that you and I have privilege that we don't have to go do. right? Like you would have a level of privilege. What we see what options are in front of us, and we think that we know that there are alternatives to the decision that we're going to make. That's typically centered around like fiscal, you know what I mean, like a fiscal issue, just the lack of the scarcity. And then I think that there's a there. But I don't want to. What I don't want to say is I don't want to park it and say there aren't people who don't take responsibility. What I will say is in prison, very few people don't take responsibility because you're in prison already. It's like you already failed.
Thank you. Thanks, Herminia. We've got just a couple minutes left. I want to give Robert a chance for a comment, and then we're going to turn to Donna for the last question. Please.
Okay, thanks, Marcus. I'm speaking from Scotland. That was really awe-inspiring, very moving. I would just like to make one comment because William asked my question about how do you prevent more young people, getting into that position. And Scotland has a lot of faults. Okay, we're not perfect. We'd like to get free of England and prove how perfect we are. But we here, young people, 15-year-olds would not be sent to prison. There's something called the Children's Panel, which would look for other ways of dealing with the issue, usually by ensuring the young person has further support, but they wouldn't be incarcerated. And I'm only asking, I want to ask whether this is anything that's a possibility in the States, I mean, the different states have different laws. It seems particularly harsh to me to put a 15-year-old who's still a child, technically, in prison, Anyway, that's my thoughts.
Yeah, no, Robert, I'm so grateful for you. One of the things that, when I do in some of my my advocacy work, is centered around working on legislation and policy decisions that will hopefully overturn some of these these horrendous laws that will make it acceptable to send a child to prison. Like one of the that was number one on my list of goals to do when I came home. How do we prevent children from being in prison, right? And that was number one. So one of the places I set on the board for was called the Campaign for Youth Justice. And the Campaign for Youth Justice built out a campaign that allowed us to, one, study other models inside of Norway and Scotland. And we learned from your models and learned how best to be able to identify and segment this problem that we had in the United States. There have been bills that have been permeating around the country that have led to new laws that have now prevented states from placing juvenile offenders in adult prisons. And now I think we're up to 48 states do not send juveniles to adult prisons. Now, if they get sentenced even into adult time, we have about 12 to 13 states, I believe, that will keep a juvenile inside of a juvenile facility until they turn the age of 18, and then they'll transfer them into an adult facility. But that's one of the things that we were adamant about. And I'm super excited to know that that legislation has swept across the country, and we're getting to a place where we're keeping children out of adult prison. Now, that doesn't mean that's retroactive, right? So those children that are there now, unfortunately, they're still there, and we're still working on different campaigns to help try to overturn that. But work in progress. And kudos to you guys for the work that you guys done over there. You guys are one of the models that I study.
Okay, thank you. You're an inspiration, really. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Robert. I appreciate you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Donna, I apologize to you and to all the others who have questions out there. We're out of time, but I'm hoping, Marcus, maybe you can give us a little informal time afterwards. Stay for 15 minutes. If you can, we'd love it. If you can't, we understand. The commitment was for an hour. And so I'm going to turn it over, though, to President Bill to close out the program. President Bill.
Okay, Steve, thank you very much. Well, Marcus, we have a lot of great speakers, but your story is one of the most compelling. And personally, thank you for your leadership in trying to bring justice to the younger people who get sentenced. And what you've done in terms of this technology is just fantastic. Made a huge difference, obviously, in many lives. If you're based here in Washington, I would like to invite you to consider becoming a member of our club. We're such a powerful social force in and of ourselves. But it's really a pleasure to have you here. And for you, we have a tradition of honoring each of our speakers by planting a tree, either on the National Mall or by the tidal basin. I unfortunately can't hand you the tree certificate that I would if we were meeting in person, but we will put it in the mail to you, and you will be invited to our next tree planting ceremony, probably in early November, if you're in town. So again, thank you so much for speaking to us today. It was a very moving presentation.